Hey there, this is Buford, and thanks for checking out this video. So far in Season 3 of Dragonflight, we've had 2 Tyrannical and 2 Fortified weeks in Mythic Plus. So I thought this might be a good time to make a video where we look at some of my favorite and least favorite dungeons in the season so far. I'll be factoring in boss encounters, dungeon trash, and of course, dungeon loot in the ranking of this list. My goal is to do this list now, early in the season, prior to my Keystone Master goal, then revisit the ranking towards the end of the season with some final thoughts and see if any of these rankings change. The dungeon pool this season includes 2 halves of the Dragonflight Mega Dungeon, Dawn of the Infinite, Battle for Azeroth Dungeons, Waycrest Manor and Ataldar, Legion Dungeons, Blackrook Hold and Darkart Thicket, and Warlords of Draenor Dungeon, the Everbloom Wilds, and Cataclysm's Throne of the Tides. A quick disclaimer before we get started, this is just my opinion on these dungeons and should be taken as such. This list is not meant to be accepted as what the best keys to run for score or drops are. It also would be a good time to remind you that I'm not running these keys at an MDI or even optimal level in comparison to many people. I'm just working my way up to Keystone Master for the season and enjoying the ride. But I hope this list offers you a look into the mindset of someone just coming up in the world of Mythic Plus and where my thought process is when I'm running these keys. Now let's get into the rankings. To start things off with this list, my current least favorite dungeon in Mythic Plus Season 3 is Dawn of the Infinite, Murazan's Rise. I think if you polled the greater Warcraft community, a generally accepted opinion would be that Blizzard simply does not miss on their mega dungeons when they make them. When you look back at Return to Karazhan, Mechagon, Tazavesh, and now Dawn of the Infinite, it seems like all these dungeons have been incredibly popular during their respective seasons, and when Blizzard decides to revisit them. With that being said, Murazan's Rise has been a struggle for me this season to get excited about running. The low points for me in this dungeon are the sand trash area prior to Morchi and Time Lost Battlefield, as this seems to be more tedious and annoying than anything else. I'm also not a big fan of the speedrunning puzzle after you face Tyr. While I understand that this is supposed to be fun and a change of pace for the dungeon, it just irritates me that something like this is included in a Mythic Keystone that already seems to go on forever. Tyr's boss fight seems like it's going to be a big make-or-break key-depleting boss fight later on in the season when higher keys start to get run, and having a boss fight that early of that nature seems like it's going to lead to a lot of frustrating keys on the horizon. All that being said, I think Time Lost Battlefield and Morchi are some of my favorite boss fights and dungeons I've ever done, with challenging and fun mechanics that can be punishing if not done correctly. The loot is also pretty nice, which makes it a dungeon worth running. I'm looking at you, Gorehowl. I just think this dungeon some way, somehow needs to be looked at for some kind of change. I'm not sure what that is at this point, but if they make a change to the timer or some of the trash or something of that nature, I think it could easily be higher up on the list. Up next on the list, coming in at number 7, is Throne of the Tides. For the record, I love the idea of Blizzard bringing in Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria, or Warlords of Draenor dungeons into the Mythic Plus pool every season, as I think it's fun and a great change of pace from the same dungeons we've already done previously. I just wish in this case that it was literally any dungeon other than Throne of the Tides. This has forever and always been one of my least favorite dungeons. I don't care for the pathing, or most of the annoying trash. The Gauntlet has always been annoying and a headache, even going back to when it was released in Cataclysm. Couple that with the fact that there are 2 bosses in this dungeon that are pretty difficult and can totally kill your key, and 2 that literally just fall over and die whenever you do them. If I had to find a positive, I would say that although difficult, Ozamat's fight got a good rework for Mythic Plus, and I've enjoyed closing out the dungeon with this fight thus far. Also, the loot here is really good from this dungeon. Let's just hope I get it out of the vault so I don't have to run the actual dungeon too much. This is going to be a dungeon that I only want to run for Mythic Plus score, and that fact leads to a low ranking on this list. At number 6 on the list, we have Waycrest Manor. There are 2 reasons that are mainly responsible for Waycrest's spot on this list, and they are Soulbound Goliath and the overall length of the key. Soulbound Goliath is a fight that I have always struggled to enjoy, especially on tyrannical weeks. The Soul Thorn ability is incredibly annoying to deal with, and from what I hear, it's going to feel a lot worse the higher the keys go. So the dungeon gets a big knock here. The other issue I have here with Waycrest is that it feels like you're in this key for an eternity. It seems like no matter how you optimize trash pulls or how much your DPS is pumping, you just feel like you're spending forever in this dungeon and it just keeps going and going and going. Now with that being said, aside from Soulbound Goliath, Waycrest Manor has a bunch of awesome boss fights. Rawl and the Three Witches are both engaging boss encounters that I've always liked doing, and Gorak Tull and the Waycrests are also pretty fun. I also really like the fact that different groups can pull the trash and bosses in a different order almost every time they do it. Anytime you have options, that's a big win for a Mythic Plus dungeon. I'm hopeful that as the season continues, Waycrest will become more enjoyable for me to run. At number 5, I have the Everbloom Wilds. Everbloom is another revisitation of an older dungeon in this Mythic Plus season, coming from the Warlords of Draenor expansion. Everbloom has arguably some of the most enjoyable trash pulls for me in the dungeon pool this season. It values doing interrupts and priority targeting dangerous mobs, and has some great boss encounters too. With that being said, the first boss, Witherbark, is a drag. It's just a boring fight that I don't care for at all, and it's a means to an end, I guess. Archmage Soul can be a real struggle for some players because, well, there's a dodge mechanic, but is a great challenging boss in this dungeon that I do enjoy doing even as a melee DPS. Yalnu is also a lot of fun, but is one of those bosses that takes forever to actually go down, especially on a tyrannical week. The loot for me also leaves a little to be desired, but I know there's some dandy pieces here for other classes, so I tried not to let that factor into my ranking too much. Everbloom is far from the worst, but also definitely not the best dungeon this season, so lands in the middle of the pack. Now for the top half of the list, starting at number 4, we have Blackrook Hold. I tried to stay far away from this dungeon during Legion. I didn't care for it at all back then, but this dungeon has really grown on me this season. The trash is engaging with interrupts required, priority targets, things to dodge on the ground, and bats. Lots and lots of bats. The bosses also have a good mix of mechanics and can be challenging if not done properly, and they will certainly punish you if not done properly. The key timer seems pretty forgiving and has one of the most enjoyable final boss encounters in the dungeon pool to go with some of the best loot in the dungeon pool. I've really enjoyed running this key so far, and I'm really looking forward to running higher Blackrook Hold keys as the season progresses. Coming in at number 3, we have the other half of the expansion's mega dungeon, Dawn of the Infinite, Galakron's Fall. This dungeon makes up for everything I disliked about Murozond's Rise, and then some. Most of the trash is fun to clear. The second boss is one of the more challenging and engaging boss fights of the season, and the final showdown we have with Iridikron is, in my opinion, one of the most epic dungeon encounters in the game to date, and is a great way to wrap this dungeon up. Also, it houses some of the best dungeon loot of the season, and always has a bunch of people looking to run it, so finding a group for it is relatively easy. The pathing is pretty enjoyable, and there's just enough change of scenery moments in it that it doesn't get stale to look at. The key timer is kind of a mystery to me. It seems like at this point, I'm never really in danger of dropping it to a +2 chest. We'll see how that changes as the key levels increase, but so far the timer just seems to be a freebie unless something goes very wrong. Out of the Dragonflight dungeons we've gotten in Mythic Plus this expansion, this one has to rank towards the top. And there were definitely some good ones this expansion. I'm really thankful that Galakron's Fall is so strong and sort of redeems the Mega Dungeon, especially with where I placed Murozond's Rise on the list. In the second spot on this list, we have Darkart Thicket. This was one of my favorite Legion dungeons to run back in the day, and I was so excited to see it returning this season. Let's start by talking about the trash. The trash is engaging throughout, with interrupts needed, dodging mechanics, and wellpegs squishing all mixed in. Overall, I think this dungeon has the best trash of any dungeon this season so far. As far as the bosses go, all of them are bosses I enjoy fighting. Oakheart is probably my least favorite of the bunch, but that honestly might be attributed to just the eye trash mobs right before his encounter, because those are the only trash mobs I dislike somewhat in this dungeon. Shade of Xavius is also a great final boss encounter and is a strong close to this dungeon. The timer seems appropriate for the dungeon, and the loot is sweet as well. All around, this is a solid dungeon, and I'll be looking to run this key any chance I get. And that means in the top spot for this Mythic Plus season is Ataldar. What can I say? I love Ataldar. It was my favorite BFA dungeon back in the day, and is still one of my all-time favorite dungeons now. The ability you have to path the dungeon as you please is such a huge deal here for me. I love that each group I run it with does a slightly different route each time. The trash mobs are amongst the best this season, with pterosaurs that need to be interrupted, stealth mobs that can surprise you, and some truly huge trash packs that can pump up those DPS numbers in truly epic ways. There's something so satisfying about entering a dungeon and blasting right to a boss, and this one has a prime example of that with Razan. I enjoy all the bosses in this dungeon, with Yasma and Razan being my favorites. Priestess is a great fun fight, and even though I find the totem killing annoying for coordination purposes most of the time, Volkal is also a fun boss fight in the second phase. The timer is incredibly forgiving here, but anytime you can pretty reliably slam a key for a +3 chest makes you feel pretty darn good. I was so happy to see Ataldar come back this season, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if this is my most run dungeon at season's end. That does it for my Dragonflight Season 3 Mythic Plus ranking list. Do you agree with my rankings? Or do you think there's an egregious error somewhere on this list? Let me know in the comments with how you would rank the dungeons. Again, I'm looking forward to doing these dungeons a whole bunch more this season, and at a higher level to boot. And I plan to revisit these rankings at the end of the season, or at least after I complete my Keystone Master journey. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've been trying to post videos like this in addition to my 0 to Keystone Master weekly updates, and it really helps me as a creator to know that people enjoy them. Until next time, I hope you are able to run all of your favorite dungeons this season, and I'll see you again for another video very soon.